it's Richard from Guitarist here, and I want to show you two Strats, one made in Mexico, one made in the US. They're a similar price and a similar spec. It's not so much a comparison of the tones between the two because they are slightly different construction, but we want to know what you're getting for your money, and should you decide to buy one of these, where you might want to put your money. I'd like to start with this limited edition. It's the Vintera 2 60s road-worn Strat. As you can see, it's a sonic blue rosewood slab board. Let's have a bit of a talk and a play through, and I'll go into some of the specs as we go. So I've plugged into the Studio Vox AC15 with a slightly edgy clean sound. These pickups are the vintage 60s style, so they're about 5.5K, they're about slightly less than that. They're not a calibrated set, the bridge pickup isn't more powerful, but you can balance them out, just have the bridge pickup higher. That's the classic look with Strats, that's how they made them back in the 60s, and that's what this guitar is all about. So have a listen to a couple more sounds. These in-between positions are not hum cancelling. There's not a reverse wound, reverse polarity pickup in the middle, because that isn't how Fender made them back in the 60s. So you've nevertheless got that lovely stringy sound. This guitar's got quite a warm sound to it, which could be down to the pickup wind. It could also be down to the rosewood slab board. It's impossible to say really, but it does sit in something of a sweet spot. So there you go with the classic middle and bridge. Let's pull that down to the bridge. Now I'm not using any tone controls on anything here. This is the flat out raw sound of the bridge pickup. I have to say that's very easy on the ear indeed. Quite often with the Strat you'll flick down to the bridge pickup and wish for something with a little bit less top end. Having said that, this guitar does cater for that, because there's the well, what was a very popular mod for people with vintage Strats is to wire the tone control so that you have this extra control over the bridge pickup. In this case, this tone control here, which would traditionally be the neck, controls the neck and middle. So we can have, leaving this tone control exclusively for the bridge pickup. So coming back to about 6 or 7, we can keep some twang, but we can just tame that extra, what people call the ice picky edge. This guitar isn't particularly guilty of that in my opinion, but with a bit of drive and certainly a bit of volume there, flicking between the neck and the bridge, it's quite nice to not have that clang. Let's have it wide open again. So that's swapping between about 6.5 on the tone control. I'm moving it by ear rather than by the numbers. So there's a really good case for each of those sounds, rather than saying, ouch, I need to turn that tone control down. It's just a choice between whether you want to go slightly fuller sounding or whether you want more of that traditional Strat twang, which it has plenty of, with lots of body in the tone. So having heard some sounds, let's get into the specs in a bit more detail. As I said earlier, this is the 60s style, and in keeping with that, and with it being road worn, it's a nitro cellulose body and neck finish. And though it's not immediately apparent, the original road worn series came out of Mexico in about 2009, and though they were great guitars and they were very popular, they've refined their aging process a bit, I think, since then. So the nitro has got a nice checking that you see in certain lights, and that is on the body and on the neck and on the face of the headstock as well. So let's be methodical about this. I'm going to start at the headstock. We've got the standard Kluson type split tuners. We have what Fender are calling a 60s C neck. It's quite slim. It's not one of the chunky ones. It's a lovely shape though. We have the vintage radius 7.25. We have what Fender are calling narrow vintage tall frets on here on the slab rosewood board. The clay dots and position markers. Standard 4-bolt fixing to the body. The body's an older body. It's routed for 3 singles, as you would expect, though interestingly the bodies are finished and then they're routed, so inside the route there's no paint. The standard 250K tone pots that I've mentioned, the blade selector, the vintage style bridge. This has got the vintage slightly wider string spacing. So more modern Strats come with a slightly narrower string spacing. The difference is minimal. Underneath there you've got a die cast block. It's not deep drilled or anything like that. It's very standard, but it works pretty well. Standard screw-in arm. At some point in this guitar's future, maybe someone's going to put a bit of PTFE tape on the threads to stop it wobbling around, but at the moment it works great. As you can see, I've swapped over to the American Pro Classic Strat. This is the US built one. It costs about 150 UK pounds more than the other one, so it's very, very close in price. What I intend to do here is to have a talk and a play like I did with the other one, then we'll get into the specs in more detail. So let's start with the neck pickup. The first thing that strikes me picking up this guitar and playing it is that I'm really noticing that the pickups are a different voicing really. They are called the Coastline pickups. They've got a few more winds on them than the vintage 60s type on the other guitar. These are a little bit over 6K, and I do feel that you hear it. Obviously, a different guitar, different piece of wood in the neck and body. It's impossible to absolutely empirically state that that is the thing that's making the difference, but I believe that it is a significant part of the difference in tone, especially as we have a maple board, which is traditionally thought of as brighter, but this guitar isn't really brighter. It's got a bit more heft. Maybe it goes lower and higher, actually. On reflection, it's more bottom end and a little bit more top. Let's have a listen to a few more sounds. I'm going to go with the in-between settings here, which are hum cancelling. So that's one of the more modern features we have. Let's go middle. Okay, that sounds pretty satisfying to me. Let's go for the bridge and middle. Some nice sparkle happening there, still lots of body to the tone. Right, now let's go for the raw. I mean, wide open, no tone controls turned down or anything like that, the bridge pickup. So I'm getting a much more edgy sound there. We do have the low end, but I'm hearing a bit more snarl in the top end. What I'd like to do is flick between the neck and the bridge, and then start messing around with these tone controls because they're a little bit fancier than on the other guitar. I'll talk you through that. That's quite a cruel thing to do to any Strat. Hear the neck pickup, then flick to the bridge pickup without the tone control down a bit. But as you can hear, they are reasonably well balanced, even without having done any jiggery pokery. But what I would like to do is bring this down, say, to about 7, see what we get. This configuration is identical to the other guitar in that we have one tone control for the neck and middle and one tone control exclusively dedicated to the bridge. So these are the grease bucket tone controls, which essentially are a slightly more tweaked version of your standard control. Fender don't publish the specs, but we have a capacitor and a resistor going on in there. What I'm going to do is talk you through. This is wide open. Down to about 6. I'm hearing an effect here in the room, but it is more subtle, so I'm going to go down further. I'm going to go down to about 4. Up to 5. So wide open again. I don't know how much the difference is coming across, but as the player who's hitting the strings and getting that instant feedback, I'm liking being down at about 6 for that bridge pickup. And I suppose we should have a little bit of a look at how the grease bucket works on the neck too. And turn the guitar up to do so. Genius. I mean, that's really quite bloaty down there. Mind you, could... That's wide open. Let's is that? About between 5 and 6. I have to squint because I'm not wearing my readers. It's pretty versatile. I mean, how much that matters on the neck pickup depends on the kind of player you are. Personally, I really like the extra versatility of the grease bucket circuit on the bridge. It seems a little bit more refined. Though this guitar does have that slightly different voice I was talking about, where I think it goes lower and higher. There's still a sweetness to it, but it's maybe not as sweet as the other guitar, I don't know. Well, I think it's time to get into a bit more detail about the specs on this, because there are some modern refinements. So maybe going from the headstock end first. We have this satin finish maple neck. That's a 9.5-inch radius board. But before I get ahead of myself, we have these classic gear staggered tuners. They're an 18:1 ratio, so there's super fine control. The low E and A are taller than the other posts. So this gives you a slightly better angle over the nut. So when you've got that one string retainer, which is up on quite a tall washer, you don't want too much of an angle that can lead to sticking. So little refinements like that are all in place, which is great. They are medium jumbo frets on this guitar. I've told you about the radius already. Standard join with the body, no special angles or micro tilts, anything like that. We have these finishes, which there are more finishes available on this particular guitar. This isn't a limited edition. It's a faded version, and I think that it's probably not nitro. It doesn't smell like nitro, but that isn't a problem per se. We have the very standard kind of vintage mint green look here. We have what looks like a standard bridge, but actually this is a slightly narrower modern spacing here, which is very nice. I mean, it does mean that you've got less chance of pulling the strings off up there, because that can be a complaint about the more vintage spec. And I'd like to say a little bit more about that later concerning the other guitar. So narrower string spacing here, and this fretboard, the nut width is about 1 millimeter more on this guitar, 43.5 on this guitar, 42.2 on the other guitar. So that does put us into a different camp as far as the feeling goes. This is a modern C. It's slightly shallower, very comfortable, not too thin. Sometimes a really thin neck can actually feel quite uncomfortable, I think. Slightly more chamfering on the body. The weight, this guitar is ever so slightly lighter than the other one. This is about 7.5 pounds, whereas the other one is more like 7 3/4. So underneath here is a steel block that's deep drilled. That's more like the vintage. It can lead to better tuning stability. It's a little bit fancier. It's slightly higher spec. Now, one or two more things about the neck before we finish here. 22nd fret, very obvious. And we have, of course, this truss rod, which is not accessed in the usual 60s vintage place, but this is a two-way truss rod accessed at the top, so it's easier to live with. You know, you don't have to be loosening anything or taking necks off, etc. So which one would you buy? I guess it depends what you're looking for. I know that from my own perspective, I've always liked the 60s. I like the slab board. I like the aesthetic. I do like the flatter radius that leads to a better setup. For this guitar, what are you looking at? About 1,349. That's in a gig bag. For the US made, you're looking at 1,499, also in a gig bag. And to be fair, you are actually getting a slightly quote-unquote higher spec guitar for your money there. So that's worth thinking about. And that's available in a variety of finishes, and it's available with a rosewood board, just as this is available, I think, just in black, this limited edition version, but it's available with a maple neck too. So there are a few options. You can mix and match the spec between the two to an extent. Well, personally, I've already said, and I'll say it again, I really like this Sonic Blue. But I do have to say there is one thing about it which has troubled me, and that is the cutting of the nut here. I did notice that it wasn't superbly well finished there, though you could put that down to the road-worn styling, if you like. But I just noticed that the spacing of the strings, while it's perfectly even going across the nut, we have ended up with this low E being quite close to the fret ends. In my opinion, too close. I would have to change the nut out on this guitar. And to be fair to Fender, I would say that that's the first time, having played probably hundreds of them and hundreds of Mexican Fenders specifically, I've never seen that before. So I would like to point that out. I don't think that the Mexican guitars are inherently worse quality. They're just a different spec. If this didn't have that problem, I might be looking to create a distraction while I snuck it into the boot of my car. So these are both great guitars. Personally, I'd probably go with this Mexican because I kind of like the vintage appointments, though obviously it does have that issue with the nut. What I would certainly do, and would recommend anyone watching this video thinking about buying one of these does, is go to a shop and try the actual guitar that you're going to buy, and then you can keep an eye out for little things like that and just get a feeling from the guitar. A long time ago in the 90s, I worked in a dealership which bought in a big batch of Japanese Strats, and it was my job to unbox and clean and tune up and put them out on display. And I did notice at the time that some of those guitars were perfectly okay, some of them were great, and it was very hard to put your finger on why. So I think it's important to actually have the thing in your hands before you make that decision.